Welcome to the Pastured Pig Podcast, where we share the successes and challenges of raising pigs on pasture. We talk to producers all over the country, from small homesteads to large commercial pasture operations. Whether you're new to pastured pigs or have been raising hogs for decades, we hope you hear new ideas and new perspectives on pasturing hogs. Here's your host, Troy McClung.
Hello, everybody. It's good to be back. If you've been following the podcast, of course, you may notice that November was a little thin. We had only one episode at the beginning of the month, and then there were just crickets chirping there for a while. And I want to apologize to everyone. I wanted to try to stick with our schedule. I was trying to be very diligent with that and having at least 2 episodes a month. But the ugly COVID virus showed up at Red Tool House and got all 4 of us. So both Kelly and I and my 2 teenagers, we contracted it, and symptoms kind of interesting. We were symptomatic just one day after the other. So my youngest showed up symptoms on a Sunday. I was Monday. Liam, the oldest, was on a Tuesday, and Kelly showed up on Wednesday with her symptoms. And ironically enough, all 3 of them actually skated through it pretty well. They still had some fatigue, head cold type stuff, cough, but I was good for the first 5 days, and then it became a gastrointestinal thing. And without getting too disgusting, I'll just say that I felt like I was being stabbed repeatedly for 8 days straight. So I got the blessing of going to the hospital twice. I lost 15 pounds in 8 days. I ate nothing in 8 days. And at times I curled up and cried like a little girl. No, it was not pleasant, and it's obviously a very, very interesting virus. It just amazes me how indiscriminate it is. No matter your vaccine status, or no matter your age, no matter your health. I mean, my father-in-law was the one that gave it to us, and he is the poster child for somebody who should not have survived it. And he just walked it off like it was nothing. So anyway, enough of that. That's not what this podcast is about. Good night. But all of that to say that that's why we've been gone. But man, I am so glad to be back. I would say if I had to scale things, I'm about 95% right now. Just get a little fatigued doing some of the heavier farm chores and things. But other than that, no more worse for the wear. I'll see if I can keep these 15 pounds off. I could maybe benefit from that. Not a weight loss program I would recommend, however. All right, so let's get into what we've got going on. Some announcements. Well, when you lay flat on your back for 3 weeks, there's not a lot that goes on, so there's not a lot of new announcements as far as what's going on here on the farm. I do want to say, those of you that have reached out in the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks, about coming on the podcast, please don't think I've crossed you off the list or you didn't qualify for some reason. I just haven't reached out to you because I didn't want to set any dates until I knew exactly when, A, I was going to be up and mobile, B, I was going to have enough wind to be able to talk, of course, and C, just to make sure I could get all those details nailed down. So look for that. If you've reached out to me to come on the podcast within the last 30 days and you haven't heard a definite from me, you haven't gotten a date set, again, please don't think I've abandoned you. I will be following up, and we'll get those dates scheduled now that I'm up and kicking. Okay, so let's go ahead and get right into our podcast interview that we have lined up here. Today, we're going to be talking with Rob Dowdle, and he's with Dowdle Family Farms in Mississippi. And what's neat is his farm property, he's the 8th generation on this property in Mississippi, which I think is so cool. And he gets into a little bit of that detail. But we had really good conversation about how he's balancing his dad's beef operation, kind of a more traditional beef operation, with his regenerative model. So there's kind of like this duality going on his farm that he gets into and discusses. He really gets in, talks about the benefits of the lay of the land. He's got old cotton fields. He's got some great old woodlot. In Mississippi, you're going to have a lot of that stuff. And he's also just getting a breeding pair of mangalitsas. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works out for him. So we may have to follow up with him in a year or so and see how those mangas are working out for him. But without any further ado, let me move on and have Rob tell his story and I will catch you guys on the backside of the discussion. Today I have with me, all the way from Mississippi, I have Rob Dowdle with Dowdle Family Farms. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks. Glad to be here, Troy. Enjoy your podcast and enjoy hearing the stories of the farms and how people are pasturing pigs throughout the U.S. here.
Yeah. And I've appreciated the eclectic variety of topics that we've had and people on in different locations geographically. It's been quite a learning experience. I think if I'm looking at my notes right, I believe you're one of my, I think the beginning of my 70th interview. So you're probably 71, 72, somewhere around in there. So it's neat to have that many discussions on file, and glad everybody can find some value in that.
Good.
All right, so let's talk about Dowdle Family Farms and some of the pre-screening info I'm anxious to get into, because it sounds like you guys have a storied history with the farm there. But first, let's talk a little bit about, so you're in Mississippi. So the first thing I want to ask you, of course, is how did Hurricane Ida treat you? And then you can give me a little details about your farm.
I'm going to get into trouble with many people in our area hear this, but Hurricane Ida, we've had one of the wettest years in a while, in my recent memory anyway. And so we've had a great summer for growing grasses and forages. And just as it started to get dry a couple of times, we've had 1 inch, 2 inches, one time 12 inches of rain. And Hurricane Ida, we got on our farm just over 4.5 inches or so. And about half of that occurred over a 2-day period. So it was kind of a slow soaking rain.
Oh, wow.
Rain, which was really, really nice for us.
Yeah. You guys dodged a bullet there then.
Yes, we did. We're in the northern part of the state, so we didn't have a whole lot of problems there. But other than folks around here growing corn are trying to combine corn, and it's getting wet, and the fields are wet. But for us, it was great.
Yeah. You guys fared better than we did. I think we ended up with, my rain gauge said about 6 inches of rain, but fortunately that was spread out enough that it didn't cause any issues for us either. So. Well, all right. So tell me about Dowdle Farms. It looks like from your pre-screening that you claim 8th generation on this farm. So that's pretty awesome. So how far back does this property go in the Dowdle name?
The first record that we have of our family having the land for sure is 1826. They paid taxes on the land. We think the land came in, they got it through the land grant in 1824. But we only know for sure that it was 1826. And my kids, who are 5, 8, and 10, and of course my siblings' kids, are make the 8th generation of Dowdles, who have been on the farm, worked on the farm, grown up on the farm, that kind of thing.
That is very cool. Yeah. So is that, I assume probably back in 1824, 1826, it was probably a much bigger farm as far as acreage goes, but where are you now?
It's 300 acres, a little over, something like that. About 120 acres, 160 acres or so of pasture, and then the rest of it is kind of wooded, forested land. Yeah. So that's kind of where it is now. My dad, interestingly enough, purchased the land from his cousins, I believe. Keep in mind, I'm going off not a scripted history that somebody has told me, but just from what I've gathered over the years. But my dad, when he purchased the land, part of which I think he inherited, but he purchased it from his cousins. And my dad is a veterinarian by trade. And he grew up on the land, worked it, and got it from his grandfather, whom I was named after. But, so even though the land has been in our family, and there's other Dowdle family land around ours, it has not been just inherited, over the years. It's a lot of it has been purchased, and it has been a really interesting story. I could go on into that a lot, but it's it's really kind of fascinating. My dad, I was 2 or 3. My dad changed more of my diapers on the farm. I've got 3 siblings. And the funny thing about it is that he would, I would want to go to, this is what my parents tell me, I would want to go to the farm with my dad. The other siblings would stay home during the day, and I'd be out there with him for hours and hours, and he'd change my diaper out in one of the little barns on the property. And I tell people my dad changed more of my diapers on the farm than he ever did off the farm. Yeah. And it's true, not because he wasn't a very engaging dad. He was just, that's just where I was with him most of the time.
Yeah.
But so, and it had originally been cotton, previous generations had cotton. My dad slowly formed a lot of that into pasture, of the pasture land, of the open area, the grassland now, and slowly put up electric high tensile fence. I can't tell you how much electric fence we've put up over the years, kind of stretching all around it. And so, which is really costly, especially when you have a young family and, you're purchasing land and everything else. But, so most of the time I spent on the farm as a kid, we were all, putting up fences for cattle or working cattle or feeding cattle or that kind of stuff. It was all, cattle based. So,
yeah, very good. So let's talk about that transition between your dad and you, because it sounds like as a veterinarian that probably kept your dad pretty busy. I assume he was a large animal vet, but he was raising cattle more in a conventional system and was just doing the cattle, and then when it was your turn to take over and how that transition happened, did you then kind of go more in a regenerative direction?
Yes. My dad actually is a small animal vet.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
And he's the only, when they first went into practice, I vaguely remember, they would do some large animal stuff, but it was mostly, goats or a horse here and there. It was still predominantly, a pet practice. But he would, and he was putting cattle on the land. And of course he deals with his own cattle. But it's kind of interesting. I asked him something about pigs. I had some pigs that were supposed to be castrated. They were not. They were about 40 or 50 pounds. And I said, I've castrated hundreds and hundreds of steers over the years from the time I was 8 or 10, but I've never castrated pigs. And it's a little more, especially when they weigh about 50 or 60 pounds, it's a little more involved than even the largest cattle. But anyway, it's just, we didn't have holding facilities or anything. But so and he'll help out. He'll do fecal float smears or that kind of stuff for me if I'm trying to test for parasites or something. Yeah. That transforms across all of them. In terms of the transition, we are actually, of course, my dad owns the land. He has his financial operation, and I have mine. And even though those two financially are very separate, I purchased the calving crop that he has, or some of them or all of them or whatever, from him, and finish those out, like for the grass finished beef. But for and we do a lot of rotational grazing. My dad was always interested in rotational grazing. In fact, he used to subscribe to the Stockman Grass Farmer.
Oh yeah.
But as you get busier and as he's working 60, 80 hours a week, depending on the week, it just gets kind of chaotic. But that transition, some of the stuff that I've done has started that way. I just moved back home just over 4 years ago from South Georgia. In 2000, I graduated high school, went to college, then went to seminary, went to another seminary, and then went to a church in South Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And for a variety of I'm a full-time pastor by trade. And so for a variety of other reasons, while we were in Georgia, just for health reasons, I started doing some gardening stuff. Couldn't get, nutrient-dense food that I needed for health reasons. And so started doing some market gardening type things. And then it really started a little over 5 years ago, but my wife's from Mississippi, from Yazoo County, which is a couple hours away, 2.5 hours, 150 miles. And both of our parents are young and healthy. They have time to spend with their grandkids, our kids. We were 9 hours away driving from my wife's parents, and a little over 7 hours from mine. And it's, our kids were young enough. Our youngest daughter at the time was 1. And we just wanted to be able to be close enough that they could spend more time together, without having to do a long, a trip, in 48 hours, and
right.
16 of that hours is spent driving. And so it's opened up a lot of things. When we moved back here, I started the market gardening stuff and didn't really have a whole lot of a plan. My dad has been extremely gracious and forgiving with some of my stuff, not because of just because I haven't known what I've been doing most of the years, in the last 4 years. And it's what it's like. Farming is a little bit of a trial and error here and there.
Absolutely.
And my dad has made enough mistakes in his life, and he has been able to kind of offer a lot of insight and wisdom in that. But also, when I make mistakes, he's thoughtful enough that he's he understands. He's been there, and has always been very supportive.
Yeah.
We started off with some chickens and that kind of stuff, and then in addition to the beef, but then 3 years ago got our first pigs, and that's kind of to redirect this towards pastured pigs. That's kind of how we got started.
Yeah.
Doing pigs. I couldn't find any feeder pigs. I checked our Mississippi Market Bulletin, which is produced by the Mississippi Department of Agriculture and Commerce, and they've got advertisements in there, but every time I would get, the issue and call, the folks would be, would have sold the weaned pigs already. And I found a lady about 30 miles away that had some American guinea hogs, and I think I got 3 or 4 of them. There's an interesting story there. It's not time to go into it, but they just kind of showed up on the farm one day. But
yeah.
they, and it took me a little while to kind of sort out what had happened. But, and so we started off with American guinea hogs and processed all of those on farm ourselves. And, which was, really good, very helpful actually. And then come to find out, in my wife's hometown, I found a guy that this was December, so we'd had those guinea hogs for about 6 months. And this guy had some feeder pigs that he was selling, and he raises them. My wife grew up with his younger sister, and of course, knows their family really well. And they breed show pigs, and these were just some Herefords and some Gloucester spots and some others that he had that did not have the markings or configurations or whatever else for show pigs, and so he sold them as feeder pigs. And so we grabbed those and jumped from the frying pan into the fire, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been kind of strange. We haven't had a real consistent variety of pigs. My favorite have been Chester Whites. A lot of people, because of the light skin, especially here in the South, we get a lot of sun in the summer. They talk about sunburn. We provide a lot of shade for our pigs, even when they're on pasture, and we really don't put them on pasture, just open pasture, much, unless they're It's in the cooler weather. And so they're normally in a heavily wooded area. So, they can get out of the sun, they can get in the shade. Of course, we have, they'll create wallows and that kind of stuff. We've had deer ops, just a variety of pigs. We've always bought feeder pigs. And interestingly enough, Saturday, I'm going to pick up some a breeding trio of mangalitsa. Never had them before, never used them before. If they don't work out, I'll process the gilts and on farm for our family.
Sure.
But they're anyway. And this guy's a pig breeder that breeds Herefords, but he had these. He's also starting to raise the Idaho pastured pigs. Mm-hmm. But he just anyway. He was. I think he had these breeding trio for a daughter or something like that. And so we're getting these purebred mangalitsa for a pretty good price, really good price actually.
Yeah.
And we'll see how they go. I'm not a real big fan of farrowing. I'm a really big fan of other people farrowing. Right. There's a lot involved there that I don't have the time for at the moment, but so we'll see how it goes. So we just get a variety of, most of what we have right now are Chester Whites mm-hmm. and some deer op mixes is what we have on the farm right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that, the idea of just working with feeders right now, kind of getting into your groove and then being able to test. Sounds like you're getting some good experience in testing different genetics, different breeds that are coming through, and just kind of seeing the temperament of those different types. And I will be interested. I'll have to follow back up with you in a year or two and see what you think of those mangalitsas. It's funny that there's people that absolutely love them. There's people that wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole. But I guess that's the same with anything. So be curious to see how that fits into your model here in the next year or so.
Yeah. Well, the mangalitsas, I've heard a lot of great things. If I had my brothers, I'd probably have a mangalitsa cross mm-hmm. and just as a feeder pig. Of course, then people want more money for them. But like I say, I don't know. It's a chance to try the breed, and I think they're certainly be well suited for a family that wants to have one or two pigs to fill their freezers. We get requests for that a good bit.
Yeah.
Of course, we don't farrow, so but in our area there are a lot of people who are kind of interested in and do that type of stuff, and they just have a hard time getting those feeder pigs. And so the mangalitsa would be a really good option for them. I'm not sure how they'll do in our system.
Sure.
But we'll find out.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, you don't know until you try, definitely. All right, so let's talk a little bit about your setup. You've given us some insight there, and I'd like to explore that a little bit. So it sounds like with your dad's work when you guys were younger, putting in some infrastructure, the high tensile fencing, probably some key perimeter fencing there, and then you have quite a bit of acreage under woodlot that keeps you from kind of getting into his pristine pasture with his cattle, and sounds like there's kind of various zones there that you guys are kind of hang out in. What other details do you have infrastructure for your pastured pigs, and then of course even your beef operation? How do those two kind of work hand in hand with one another?
Well, most of the pigs we get, in fact, none of them have been, with the exception of the guinea hogs, none of them have been trained to electric fencing. So I've got it started out as a wintering area, kind of a compost heap, truthfully. It's about 500 or 600 square feet. Got a video on our YouTube channel that shows a little bit about it. And it's just dog wire fencing, 2x4 welded wire fencing next to the barn. And I train them with that 1/2-inch poly tape on the outside of it. If the training goes well, they're out of there in a week and a half. If it goes poorly, sometimes it takes a good bit longer. But we can put wood chips, leaves, all kinds of stuff in there to help, to create a composting system. that, helps deal with the manure and create that carbon bedding for them. Once they're trained to that, I have used in the past the polywire, but to be honest with you, the polywire is a pain in the neck if you move frequently and don't have a whole lot of time. And so what I've started doing is last spring, we have a 1 acre area of woods with a good number of mostly hardwood and a lot of oaks in it. Several big oaks that I use for high tensile fencing, and the pigs have done exceptionally well there. I've got a line about waist, because cattle run every area that our pigs do. I have to keep a line for the cattle. So I keep it about waist high, 3 feet off the ground or so. I keep a line to keep the cattle from tripping over the pig fences.
Right, yeah.
And it's not necessary, but because I have different sizes of pigs, I just use 2 high tensile wires. One 6 or 8 inches off the ground, and then another one about 20 inches off the ground. And the pigs, as long as the fence stays on, they do really well. At that area, we've got electricity, close by, running water, piped water. The area where we just set up, or in the process of setting up, pig paddocks and some woods. Most of that, the farm, first of all, is kind of spread out. So in an area where the pigs are trained, it's on one end of the farm. It's 17 acres in the corner of 2 roads. So you go west across that road that they're on, that seed tick. You go west across that road, and there's about 70 or 80 acres of pasture. And then on some low spot, there's a section of woods there as well. You go east across that separate road, north across a separate road from that area, and it's there's more, pasture and more woodlots, and that's where I'm actually moving the pigs now. There's a solid gravel road that stays in good shape throughout the year. My dad had it when he purchased the land. He had it cleared years ago. He couldn't pay just to pay the note, the annual note on the farm loan, and so he had it cleared, and just what grew back. And so there's 50 acres in that area, and on 9 of that, I'm setting up individual paddocks that range from half or 3/4 of an acre up to an acre, and I'm setting up 8 paddocks there. And then those other 40 acres or so, they're divided by a drainage ditch and a road and some other stuff. But it already has an electric fence perimeter, so I'm just going to put up an electric fence around, make 3 paddocks or so out of that area.
Yeah.
And that'll offer an area where I can turn the pigs out, and for brief periods of time, trying to find 20 pigs in a 10-acre paddock is a lot harder than it sounds like.
Right.
At least for me, especially when it's wildly overgrown.
Yeah.
And they don't always hear when you call. That's the other thing. If they're asleep, pigs don't. You can walk right up to them with a drum, and they may not hear you. That's the thing that amazes me more than anything about pigs. But
yeah, I've always thought mine were dead. A couple times I thought mine were dead because they're sleeping so soundly. I see them up on the hills, like, I think that pig's dead. Yeah, beat on the bucket or whatever, and then walk all the way up the hill and then nudge it, and he jumps up and scares you to death.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And but anyway, so in that area, just this time of the year, really starting in October, it's a low cost, easy way of running pigs, to give them more access to other forage opportunities to reduce some feed costs.
Yeah.
And it'll require very little infrastructure to set up those fences.
Yeah. Some of those southern oaks can really produce a ton of mass, can't they?
Oh yeah. Yeah, they can. It's and a lot of the oaks in these areas are like pin oaks, water oaks. There are a few white oaks, and I'm actually thinning out a lot of the trees, the gums, thinning out a lot of oaks, just because when you look up into the forest canopy, there's so much there that none of the trees do very, very well.
Right.
So that'll be a slow process. It'll be, a decade or more before, before that stuff is opened up and the trees are decayed, and it's a little more savanna type area. But all it takes is time.
Right. That's exactly right.
But
go ahead. I'm sorry.
In that area, we don't have the water or the electricity. That's where I was going and kind of got sidetracked. But we don't have the water or the electricity in that area, and that's actually the prime area for us to put pigs right now. And so for water, I just, with the IBC tote, take it over there with a tractor and set one IBC tote on top of another frame and just use a gravity-fed water with an electric line across a 50-gallon Rubbermaid stock tank.
Yeah.
And the pigs don't get in the water and destroy the, how pigs will lay in water when they can.
Right.
They can stick their noses in there and drink, but they can't, flop the water out. I put the water out this is the first batch I just moved out there. I put a 275-gallon tank full of water out there a week ago, and they've used, including the bit of water that I drained out of there to ferment their feed, they've used, maybe 75 or 100 gallons of that just for drinking. Now, I do haul more water out there in a dry area or whatever else, for them to wallow.
Sure.
But in terms of drinking, it's, they use, and now there are only 7 pigs in that bunch, but they're 200, 250 pounds right now. So,
yeah. So with looking at that setup and the number of pigs you're talking about, let's, I know we kind of touched upon this briefly, but maybe circle back around here. So get everyone that's listening to understand that you've got a polyculture setup in your farm business plan. So you're raising pastured beef, pastured pork, you have pastured poultry, and then there's even some honey products, some things you're doing at the apiary there. So all of that working together, is that something that you look at and say, okay, right now, the percentage of this is greater than that? What is your largest operation right now? Is it your cattle over everything else?
Yes, by far the largest is the cattle, and primarily because the infrastructure's there. It's already set up. I can pay my dad a premium for his, and I, over the last year and a half especially, I've started to do a good bit more of the managing of his cows, which is kind of a weird relationship since it's his money. But by far the beef is the largest part of it financially and land-wise as well. Infrastructure set up for that. The pork is really one of those things that I'm trying to encourage and push the pork production more over the next year or so, because there's so much potential for pigs to improve soils, and our soils are just in horrible shape for the most part. But there's so much opportunity, for pigs to do that. There's a less time turnaround in terms of from the time you bring them on farm or from the time you farrow them to the time they're finished. That's a whole lot easier as well. It's also an easy way for people to, if they want to purchase a pig and process it themselves, at their house or deer camp or wherever they do it. It requires a little more infrastructure to do that with beef. So there's some good opportunity there for the pigs, and as the infrastructure increases, for the feed and for everything, there's a lot less time, raising 15 pigs at a time, isn't a whole lot more work than raising. Well, it's more work than raising 2, but jumping from 15 to 50, once you got the infrastructure in place, which we're just about to kind of tweak out, we can raise 20 to 50 at a time with very little more, additional effort.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And so, the pork is also an easy thing. And most of our sales, we do both. We do direct farm sales of whole and half animals across the board, and also individual retail cuts of meat.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, we're doing more retail cuts, more of the cheaper retail cuts over the last couple of years, really since the pandemic started. Whereas some of our first beef, we sold the premium stuff, and I was trying to figure out what to do with 100 pounds of ground beef. And now our last beef that I took this past that I brought back from the processor this past month, all that front chuck area, I just had ground up as ground beef because there's such a demand for it. Yeah. And with pigs, the individual cuts on ours, most people, when they're looking at paying $7, $8, $9 a pound, they'll pay $10, $11, $12 a pound for bacon. Yeah. They may not purchase as much of it. They'll pay $9 or $10 a pound for pork chops. But when you start getting into a 4-pound Boston butt at even at $6 a pound, they're my goodness, that's an expensive piece of meat just for whatever. But when you grind it up, which is also cheaper in processing, right, especially the hams, it's a cheaper cut of meat, and it's produced more cheaply and a little easier, honestly, than our ground beef, even though we have feed costs associated with pigs that we don't have with our grass-finished beef. And we don't have as much capital tied up in the pigs either. Yeah. We have the capital tied up, but it's for a shorter period of time, right, exactly. 6 months rather than 2 years.
Yeah, yeah, it's great for cash flow. That's why I talk about this. Obviously, I'm not in that position to do cattle, but I just love the kind of the money triangle you get with the cattle, the pork, and the chicken. That there's pros and cons to all three, but when it looks at cash flow, you can cash flow chicken in 8 weeks, pig in 6 to 7 months, and then your cattle is your bigger investment in 2 years, and that really has a nice balance to it.
That's right. Yeah. And the capital investment, even though you're not paying for feed for capital, you've got the capital investment of the cost of the livestock, but also the infrastructure. With 20 pigs, to be able to raise them on 10 acres, if you move them, if you calculate your moves pretty well, and assuming that, your ground's not underwater or something, you can do 20, 30, 40 pigs on at one time on 10 to 12 acres. And to do 10 or 12 cattle and not have to buy hay year round, it takes a lot more acreage, and that acreage, the infrastructure investment for that acreage is also significantly higher. Yeah. So it's all around. Pigs they're really a phenomenal way to start and to begin the process. Without the additional infrastructure set up. Yeah.
Yeah, so there with your processing, so you said you're doing customs with wholes and halves, and then doing retail cuts. Are you accessing USDA, or is Mississippi a state inspected state that you don't have to go USDA? There's always a story behind processing, isn't there?
I should be able to answer this much better than I can. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure. We process at a USDA inspected facility. Now, Mississippi has state inspected laws, but for the most part, the state inspected, and if you look at the Department of Agriculture and Commerce's website, they have state inspection, which allows you to do in-state and all. But honestly, the USDA inspection, that's the closest one that I have. And I say that I'm starting at a new processor for this group of pigs October 5th. Mississippi State University at their meat lab, and they don't take animals year round. They just take a few for their processing. And I need to check my label out and see if it's state inspected or federal inspected.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming that it's federally inspected. But federal inspection is what we have had, and that's what, it's just easier to go that route than try to do other stuff. But I don't think that's true in most states. I think Mississippi is just a little unique there.
Yeah, it's all about availability and quality of each, and it seems like depending on where you are, I get envious of some of these guys we talk to in the Midwest where they've got I've got 6 USDA processors an hour drive away from me, so I get to choose one or the other, and I've got to leave the state pretty much to find a USDA processor that'll accommodate me. So it is different based on regions.
Yeah, and see, our biggest problem is just having a processor, period. There are a couple custom processing plants, but one of them I would not. I took an animal to once, and I won't go back. In large part because they didn't follow instructions, but also I was not real impressed with the facility. But they paper wrap their products, and when somebody's spending for beef, if they're spending $2,000 to $3,000 for a beef, or if they're spending $1,000 or so for a pig, it costs 20 cents more, less than 20 cents more per pound, about 12 cents a pound more for it to be vacuum sealed. That packaging in and of itself is, real cheap compared to, what they're paying for the rest of it. But our USDA processing facility, we've got one close to us. Again, Mississippi State, which is 20 miles away, it's much closer, but we just can't, they just don't take animals all the time. But the, access to the processors is our biggest problem. And so you just take what you can get, and ours happens to be USDA.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's going to be an issue for a while for a lot of us, and until something changes there with some of the federal laws, and or there's something that's going to incentivize these guys to go ahead and start new businesses, new processing facilities opening up. I don't see any incentive right now to do it, but maybe that'll change.
Yeah. And there are some options for Mississippi. There's a guy starting a mobile slaughter trailer, a mobile slaughtering unit, 18-wheeler trailer, that's going through USDA inspection now. In fact, by the time this is posted online, I don't know when it'll be published, but I would assume he'll be available by then. He'll be approved by then, and he can come and slaughter, on site. The problem with that, though, is that the farm will have to have a state inspected. I think it's through the health department, an inspected kitchen to be able to break down those individual carcasses.
Yeah.
And we don't do the volume to justify that cost right now.
Yeah, exactly. That's a whole separate facility there that you got to build.
Yeah. Now there's a guy in South Mississippi, Ben Simmons, at Nature's Gourmet Farm, just outside of Petal, who installed his own processing facility both for chicken a couple of years ago and then for red meat. He just got the facility done this year in April or so. But he's the only one that I would know of that would actually be able to take advantage of that right now. But that may be an option for some of us, once we, reach the threshold where we can justify spending $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 on a processing facility.
Right, but, exactly. Yep. Yeah, that the math's got to work out there for that to happen.
Yeah.
Well, Rob, tell me, you've talked a little bit about some of the things you're working on now and what you're expanding into, but what do you think long-term goals are? What do you see 5 years down the road with the farm? What do you hope to happen?
I do not know, to be honest with you. I would like to increase our, obviously our pork production, and get it on a better schedule, and also time our beef production a little bit better. We're now state certified to, to sell honeybees and that kind of stuff. At some point, we'll do more poultry, but pastured eggs. We did pastured eggs with 100 hens or so for a while, and it's one of those things that you can have 10 or 20, or you can have 500. But I think anywhere in between is more trouble than it's worth. Is what I found out. Now,
Sure.
I haven't had the 500. That number may be 1,000. And likewise with the Mississippi, even though Mississippi follows federal law in terms of poultry exemptions, the 1,000 exemption and then the 20,000 bird exemption.
Yeah.
The Department of Agriculture and Commerce will not allow the 20,000 processing. That's another story for a whole nother day.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I may, at some point, increase poultry production, but it's so labor intensive compared to some of these other, operations, that who knows. My biggest goal, I enjoy doing what I do, and I've done it, since the time I was knee high to a short goat. But I have, my dad, the running joke in our family years and years ago was, how do you make a small fortune in the cattle business? And the answer is you start out with a large one.
Exactly.
And, he's, my dad, he's still working. He's not retired, and in large part, of course, he had 4 kids as well, don't get me wrong. But, in large part to pay for the farming ventures and all that kind of stuff. And my hope and my goal is for the farm to be profitable. It doesn't have to be lucrative, but to be profitable, at what we're doing to regenerate the landscape of the farm and to provide value for our community, so that, if someone wants to, come and grab some pork or beef or honey or honeybees or whatever, they can do so, and they know where it's coming from. They know that it's healthy. They know that we raise it, and we go out of our way to raise it in a way that is as nutrient dense as possible. And that's ultimately, that's kind of what I hope to see. We won't, in fact, that won't be a complete, that dream I don't think will be completed, but I think we'll be on a better path to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So
do you think you'll still be preaching full time in 5 years? Is that the plan to wean that back, or is the way it works out with the pastorate that could let you ride off into the sunset, into retirement that way?
I don't know. Both churches I've served at as a pastor have been very good and very gracious. I enjoy what I do. I also enjoy the farming stuff. I'm not sure how to answer that. I would, if I were to be fired, and I say that jokingly. Sure. I realize nobody's going to know. I've always joked about getting fired being a pastor, but if I were to be fired, I would probably scale up and be a little more intense about the farming stuff. It's kind of strange. I'm in the process of writing up a PhD dissertation on some New Testament studies, irony in the Gospel of John. Not that anybody cares about that, but it's very ironic that I'm doing a PhD dissertation on a topic that no one cares about, which is not abnormal for PhD programs.
Right. But,
usually people do that so they can get a larger church or be more productive or whatever else.
Yeah.
And if anything, I'd be more interested in scaling down, not leaving the pastorate and not even leaving my church, but I'm certainly not interested in trying to get a larger church or anything along those lines.
Gotcha. Well,
so,
I figured your dissertation would be on the synoptic gospels and Jesus casting the demons into swine and how that relates to farming practices then in that area of the Decapolis.
Well, there is the potential there, but I started this dissertation 9 years ago, right. And for some health reasons and moving, it's been delayed. But yeah, that would be a good that would be a very good topic there.
Yeah. I actually ran across. I was actually leading a discussion a couple months ago about that very thing, and it was just kind of tongue in cheek, simply because being a pig guy, it's like, those poor pigs. But yeah, it makes for some easy discussion. Well, wonderful. So I can't let you go yet, Rob, without asking our closing question. So I have to ask you, what is your best experience or favorite part about raising pigs on pasture?
Oh man, I've known you were going to ask for that and haven't known how to answer that. I'm not sure that I can limit it to one. One of the things that interests me the most about pigs is that they are just extremely. Temple Grandin, in one of her books, I think it's Animals Make Us Human, but she talks about how animals, especially pigs, have this seeking behavior that kind of engages a part of them. And that, if I remember correctly, she had said that you could put a piece of straw or a handful of straw in a pen with pigs, and that would entertain them, even on concrete, wherever else, for a day. Of course, they need new stuff. And the thing that amazes me about the pigs is when they go into a new paddock, and this is honestly one of the reasons I'm designing smaller paddocks to put more pigs in and to move them more frequently, that, they'll go around and they'll look at stumps that are half rotten and root around in them. You put something new in their pen and they go in there and they play with it, they run, they jump around. It's really fascinating behavior. They're just incredibly, people talk about how smart they are, but they're incredibly inquisitive, at least in my limited experience, they seem to be. And so even dropping with a little tractor on the loader, I'll drop a half rotten log into the pen a little while later. The pigs just have a blast playing with it. They'll stop for a while, lose attention, and then they'll come back a few hours later, play with it some more, and break it down. But it's amazing to see in that process how they'll break down trees. Probably my most humorous moment, though, in our training pen with our pigs, this batch that we got in a couple of weeks ago, and they're Chester Whites. They one of them, I feed them by hand, and I usually feed them fermented feed and mix in a little bit of kelp meal with it. But I feed them by hand, so that they get used to me and so forth. And after a couple of days, I'll just sit there after I dump the feed out, and I'll touch them. And they usually pull away. Of course, these are not pigs that were born on the farm or anything. And they'll usually pull away or startle. And you know how pigs act when they get startled. Yeah. But one of them, and we find this with every single group, one of them does something just really crazy. And this one, when you put your hand on her, it's like she jumps 4 feet directly into the air. It's just the standard squeal, but she just, and one time she did a somersault while she was in the air. I don't know how she did it, don't know why she did it, don't know what happened. One pig we would dump leaves in the pig paddocks, bags of leaves that we got from town, in an area where we were doing our garden, and we dumped the leaves in there. And one pig, she was a Gloucester spot. She would run through the leaves and kick her feet up in there. In fact, I have a video. It's not the best video, but I've got a video of it on our YouTube channel where she just runs in the air and scatters the leaves and jumps in the leaves like a kid does. Right. And it's the individual personalities, their different idiosyncrasies and stuff that it just fascinates me about the pigs. But that's not a simple, easy, or brief answer. But
no, that was good stuff. Yeah, I agree. I think the anecdotal experiences with the pigs themselves are what really endear me to them more, just because, like you said, with the personality, the entertainment, the inquisitive nature, the entertaining nature. I mean, they play with one another, and even as they get older, it's funny. There's just something about when they seem to be content, when they seem to have their basic needs met, then they just get to have fun, and it's really interesting to watch.
Yeah, and it's we had one last year. We had a daycare come out with their 4-year-olds, preschoolers, and wanted to see the farm. We took them around the farm, and we had a young set of pigs, and a big set of pigs was about to go to the processor. And the ones that are about to go to the processor, I let them go up to the pen, but I wouldn't let them actually in the pen because a couple of gilts were in heat. And it's funny, and this was kind of a first for me, but I patted one and she locked up, and that was kind of interesting. But the day before, the reason I wouldn't let the kids in there is the day before, one of them was in heat. And not only did she lock up when I was petting her, but she pinned me against a tree.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like, whoa, that's kind of interesting behavior. And that may be normal, but it's, that's the joy of having pigs. They play, they jump, they run. They each have their own personalities and different things. And again, maybe that's normal behavior for pigs. I don't know, but they're really fun animals to have, much more so than poultry and even cattle.
Not a lot of personality in a chicken, that's for sure, compared to a pig. But yeah, no, I definitely agree with you on that. In fact, it seems like at times some of my older sows definitely like to mess with me. I've got one that's the oldest, and when she comes in heat, she likes to stand right in the middle of the road where I'm driving up to the barn to feed them. And when she's in heat, she just locks up, and it's like you've got a 800-pound roadblock there that you can't move very easy because she's like, I'm going to stand here until you do something. So yeah,
that's right.
Keeps it interesting. All right, man. I appreciate you coming on. If people want to find out more about your farm, where can they find you online?
Our website is Dowdle Family Farms. That's farms with an S.com. Dowdle, DOWDLE. We're on Facebook and Instagram, although I'm not a real big social media fan. In fact, the only time I'm on is to post something.
Yeah.
And then we've got a few videos on YouTube. It's not the most, anyway, they just offer a little bit of information. But our website is probably the most informative there.
All right. Well, I'll be sure to link that in the show description so you guys can check that out that are listening, and if you want to find out more about what Rob's got going on. Well, Rob, man, I appreciate you coming on, and I pray you have a good week, and pray that dissertation works itself out. That ought to be interesting.
Well, thank you. I've got a day and a half to submit another chapter that is not going well. But anyway, I appreciate it. Enjoy your podcast. I appreciate what you do. I've not looked at all your videos, your Red Toolhouse videos, but what I have seen, I'm really fascinated by. I tend to do more audio stuff as I'm working through the farm than the video. But really enjoy what y'all are doing. Appreciate what you're doing to get more pigs out on pasture and help the learning experience of all of us.
Good deal, man. Well, I appreciate it. Well, you have a good day. Well, all right. Well, I really appreciate Rob coming on the podcast and sharing his story with us. Really interesting. I love what he's got going on down there in Mississippi. Before we let you guys go, just keep in mind we've got the Patreon option out there if you want to support what we're trying to do here with the podcast. I know, again, being flat on my back for 3 weeks, haven't been able to work on some of those elements there, some of the additional marketing episodes, and, of course, some of the things we're launching now that we've reached our first goal. But I'm dangerous close to that. So hopefully the end of this month we'll be ready to roll that out. Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. So check that out if you're interested in supporting us. Those of you that have been supporting so faithfully over the past year, man, I thank you. I cannot tell you what a blessing it is for you all to do that. I know that raising hogs and doing this stuff, that every dime is needed. And it is not lost on me that you part with $5, $10, or $15 a month to support what we've got going on here. It's greatly appreciated. And I'm anxious just to keep building it and to be able to turn any of that back into a reinvestment into what we're doing here, and hopefully just keep building a bigger and bigger pastured pig community. Well, all right. Well, look forward to some more upcoming episodes, and we've got, I've still got I think I've got 3 or 4 in the bag already. So we'll definitely be able to get through December and into January. And then, like I said, with some of these others that we've got scheduled, we'll just keep on trucking. If you'd like to be on the podcast, of course, just simply reach out. You can just email troy@redtoolhouse.com. Ideally, I'd like you to go to redtoolhouse.com, Pastured Pig Podcast, and use the form. That's kind of a pre-screener, and that just helps me get my notes together. Just a couple questions you have to answer there, just so I can be ready to have a good discussion with you. Again, appreciate everybody watching. Those of you that had been following us on the channel and the YouTube channel and knew of our health situation, I thank you so much for the prayers and the well wishes. They were greatly needed and greatly felt, and it means a lot to me that you guys reach out and checked on us and inquired about us and prayed for us. So thank you so much for that, and we'll look forward to talking to you guys soon. Take care.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of the Pastured Pig Podcast. To learn more about our podcast or to submit topics or recommend guests for future episodes, visit redtoolhouse.com.